introducing our speaker today, I wanted to remind you of the events in the coming weeks. Next week, Eleanor Knox, a senior visiting fellow of the center, will be giving a talk on space-time functionalism and inertial frames. You're all welcome to attend Eleanor Knox. She's unfortunately not with us today. She had to go to a conference at Irvine. And on Fridays, there is no lunchtime talk, but we have the last annual lecture serious talk given by Holly Anderson on starting point in Ohio, a pragmatist account of the asymmetry of explanation. And the talk will be at 3:30 p.m. on the 10th floor, followed by reception. On April 1st and 2nd, it's the last conference of the semester. It's organized by also Eleanor Knox. It's going to be on space-time functionalism. If you're interested to this conference, please go to the website and register so that we have a head count before the conference. Today it's my great pleasure to introduce Deepanwita Dasgupta, who is currently a center fellow. So she's been with us now for more than a few weeks, and we've been extremely happy to be able to work with Deepanwita. Deepanwita is Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of Texas at El Paso. She got her PhD in 2010 at the University of Minnesota. She focuses on the history and philosophy of science with a special focus on non-Western contexts, or history and philosophy of science, or science at its margins, and with interest also at the Indian subcontinent. Indeed, she published a book, which I have read. Yes, you might be surprised, but I have read that.
I'm surprised, I am.
Yes. In 2021, Creativity from the Periphery, which indeed focuses on Indian science.
Which is just outside, if I might.
Right. And which is a book I can actually recommend, and was published by the University of Pittsburgh Press. So the next one, Pittsburgh right there. And Deepanwita is working on a second book, focused on what 21st century science would be looking like, and highlighting themes such as diversity and also maybe the contribution of science to wisdom. Deepanwita, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So it looks like probably my idea is to resurrect a dinosaur, because we know that natural philosophy existed once upon a time. It has been dead for a long time. We have now science, which is a better replacement. And indeed, we have an even better replacement called STEM. So I want to argue that STEM is probably not the best thing to have happened to science. And it might be a better idea to bring back natural philosophy once again. So this project is kind of the child of the pandemic, because before the pandemic started, 2018 or 19, I certainly did not think that I'm going to do anything with natural philosophy. I used lots of natural philosophy texts in my philosophy of science seminars. For example, Faraday's Chemical History of the Candle. And there is a particular kind of pleasure when you read such texts, because they touch multiple areas of life. But as a member of the department, I know that nowadays universities are all about STEM. STEM is what gets most money, most buildings, and little universities, little departments like us are constantly have to go and respond to the various deans about our impact. What is it we are doing? We are at UTEP, we are a little happily placed because we teach these large writing courses. So at least we can show some student credit. But our master's program often comes for fire, because we are not graduating enough students. 5 is too little. You should have 60. So these are things I'm familiar with. And somehow I want to argue that STEM is not science. STEM has very little connection with science understood in the sense of curiosity and understanding. STEM is more like a demand for a particular kind of workforce, and the fact that research has become very, very expensive. So the passion for these two things produce STEM, and STEM creates, it is important to know what it creates. It creates a kind of narrow spectrum professionals who do not look right and left and who kind of pride on their separation from other older type of thinking. So here are some other things I came to know over the 18 and 19. I like Philip Kitcher's works. I know about his book and his concept of well-ordered science. What is a well-ordered science? He says that, well, it is the kind of science that supports everyone's interest in the society. And how do we get what is everyone's interest? By some kind of hypothetical ideal conversation. You might be reminded of Rawls. 2019, I'm giving you a kind of autobiographical setup because I think that is the best way I can present this. 2019, I went to University of Bergen for a similar like this. They also have a center. And I discovered there is an animal called post-normal science, which almost everyone doing that. Post-normal science is not a special science. It's 21st century science under high pressure and high crisis. So these are some of their criteria when facts are uncertain, values are in dispute, stakes are high, decisions urgent, and decisions cannot be postponed. And this, they say, creates an extraordinary crisis in science. And as far as they are concerned, there is no way out of that crisis. Crisis is inevitable, but I think it is not. So there are a couple more things to set up. I noticed because I teach with another of my colleagues, the so-called ERCR courses, these ethically responsible conduct of research. We have been teaching those courses for the last, in fact, he's teaching for more than 10 years for the chemistry department. So I came to know a lot of professional chemists, all the chemistry faculty on campus. And now we are doing the same for biology. The interesting thing seems to be that in spite of all this hype about science or STEM, not everything is right with science. And some of these things are like this. Most of the scientific efforts go into those areas where there is money. There are certain areas are flush with money and certain areas are not. And those areas might be fundamental importance. In fact, at UTEP, because we are on the US-Mexico border, one of the things that have recently become very big at UTEP is Chagas disease. It is a kind of disease that so far, at least occurred only in Latin America's poorer countries, and it comes from an insect bite. And once it is there, it is going to stay forever. Now, Chagas disease is moving the north of the border. So we have a border biomedical center which specializes in that. It has received lots of money, and on the back of those, so you can see where the money goes, and the research goes with the money. And then, so far as the teaching track is concerned, there is excessive pressure to create a group of professionals, and that alone, that is the end of it. There is an increasing inability to host what might be called solitary thinkers. You must be part of a large group, because if you are not, you might find it hard to sustain stuff. And it has the traditional hostile relationship with different traditional bodies of knowledge. And on the philosophy side, philosophy is now very much a specialist game, especially with the Anglo-American tradition. And we have no measurable impact, at least from the university administration's point of view. I'm also aware, I've been reading, kind of browsing through the work of a British philosopher named Nicholas Maxwell, who speaks of wisdom. He has been speaking and written numerous books on wisdom since a long, long time. And he gives beautiful, elegant arguments. You find yourself compelled. The problem is, it's not clear what should I do to create this wisdom. And when I was kind of in this kind of situation, I had a student who took one of my philosophy of science seminars and kept repeatedly asking me, is it possible to teach chemistry without physics or without so much physics? And the background of all this is because he was going for medical school, or maybe he's eventually gone for a PhD in neuroscience. He had to take lots of chemistry courses, general chemistry, organic chemistry, so on. And while he liked the chemistry fine, he did not like the physics so much, and it happens often. And it is almost impossible to prevent because chemistry is entirely cast in the language of physics. And I did not have any good answer to give him. So when I thought about it later, I thought that there indeed might be a way to teach chemistry without so much physics. And it might create something like wisdom. So here is the plan of the talk. Wisdom might mean many, many, many things. But since I cannot focus on everything, I'm going to focus on 3 areas. One of that is whether chemistry could be taught using the change and transformation in nature as the main interface, rather than the atoms only or periodic table only approach. Second is, these are the ERCR courses with the tools of humanities and other storytelling devices. And the third, and this is where I think there will be most resistance, is it necessary for science to cooperate or develop a consilience with other traditional bodies of knowledge? I'm going to argue that it is necessary. So I'm going to pay the very little attention to that, even though I've done this for nearly 8 years. The focus is going to be mostly on chemistry and then the traditional bodies of knowledge. So here is the main idea. This we have already covered, so I'll go to the table of content. So I took this table of content, not every item. Chemistry textbooks are getting bigger. They used to be something like 900, now this one is kind of 1300 pages. And they will probably become something 15 or 1600. Luckily, these things are online. If you threw this at someone, you could kill him. So notice the design of the thing. And indeed, it is a very beautiful tool, written as competently as possible. The moment you start, you are in measurement, in significant numbers and so on. And then very quickly, you are in atomic theory. Then you come to the composition of substances, stoichiometry, their reaction. Then this is the real business, how chemistry is often reduced to physics. The electromagnetic chemistry, where then you have some large system stuff. These are the things of the large systems. Then you come many specific transition metals, and these are the tools. And then organic chemistry, chemistry with the carbon molecules. Carbons have 4 arms, so they are essential for living. Then by the nuclear chemistry, you're at the end of the book. And here you have very clear relationship with biomedical sciences. So this is more or less the structure of, I could have taken other things like inorganic and so on. But I think general chemistry, because so many people have to take it. The very interesting thing is you cannot enter this from the middle. You cannot just start here. You will not understand anything. And this happens probably dozens and dozens and dozens of students. Once this is like an army marching. Once you fall off it, you are off it. There are maybe a couple of people who are lucky enough to come back. Maybe they had a wonderful tea or a peer lead or something. But this is the commonest way of DFW, dropped, failed, withdrawn. And this is the way it produces a professional. The idea of this education is the whoever comes out will be either industrial chemist or academic chemist or something. There is no other kind of communities in mind. Versus, I think we can do it like this. So now we are not thinking of a foundational structure. It's not a staircase. It is a horizontal plane. And the plane has multiple gates of entry. So I put in little modules, whatever came to mind. I did not have much space. So you can start from fire, going back to humanities history, food, making pottery, leather, metallurgy, definitely. You can go into all the army museums in the world if you are here. Then the medicinal chemistry, the enormous. Fabrics, enormous area. Europe did not have any dyes before in the second industrial revolution. Arts and all the museums have enormous labs in the basement. And here is the plastic polymers, and I should have put some ... onto the new materials. Soaps, perfumes, not to forget our demand for luxury from chemistry. In fact, chemistry is everywhere. What it I do not say that this is perfect or anything, but the thing is, it is flat. It is organized on a horizontal plane. It has multiple gates. You can come in and you can actually learn as much as you want. Suppose if you're a weaver or have some textile business, you might want to know something about fabrics, textile dyes, but it is not clear that you immediately want to know about polymers. Whereas in the classic, traditional, there is no way you can escape. You cannot pick and choose. It is impossible. So one very obvious problem is, how are you going to teach higher level stuff? So my student, Alex Lopez, who asked me this question, he came up with an idea. So this slide is his, not mine. So everything I said so far, he put in sequence 1. And he said that there should be 2 sequence scores. And for the advanced stuff, he used topology. Topology is different from geometry because you can do the properties that remain constant even after all kinds of distortion. And because at some point we must talk of chemical bonding, and bonding are those properties which arises from moving the 3-dimensional structure, topology is a convenient way of description. So he said that we can use the conventional drawing, the ball and stick model, the better pictures today, molecular graphs, chirality, molecular symmetry. So the thing is, we can have a 2 sequence course, and the first sequence would be an extremely mixed community, people with multiple kinds of interest. Then someone will go to, even the mathematicians might come in. And in fact, there are a number of mathematicians I checked who have written textbooks to interest now mathematics students into chemistry. They're not thinking of chemists, they're thinking of purely mathematicians. So overall, I think what we can do to answer Alex's question is, general idea is to use a question cloud approach. That means the student comes in by means not of a topic like thermodynamics or something, but a specific question. Then they follow the question, and at the end of the courses, as much as they want to take, they leave new questions behind. So the more you use the system, the bigger it grows. It is an ever-expanding net. And the idea is change and transformation in nature, because this is the biggest interface we can use. Chemistry is in everything. Anytime in fact, our bagels have gone through some serious chemistry early in the morning. And so did everything else. There would not be any morning coffee. I think in physics and philosophy, we express so much unhappiness that things change. It is such a sad thing. But if things did not change, there would not be any food. There would not be any textile. So it is the change and transformation phenomena in nature that is the biggest way of thinking about chemistry. So who are the audience for this? I call them comprehensivist. I do not know what is a better, elegant sounding term for specialist. Since we do not have any natural philosophers yet on the ground, they're all dead, I think. So for a group of comprehensivists, the idea is no longer just to weed out people, but to develop a mixed community. So general chemistry and organic chemistry are taken as a gatekeeper courses, but they can also become gateways to different kinds of learning. And I take, for example, the chemists themselves tell me that chemistry as a profession is bigger than physics and biology put together. It employs so many people. And but the profession might be very big, but it is theoretically underexplored for its potential. Our primary demand to the chemist is for new material, new medication, new things. But this area has enormous potential for wisdom, which remains seriously underexplored. There are enormous communities of biology, philosophy of biology, and philosophy of physics, in fact, right here. But there is hardly a mention of chemistry. So we can use chemistry to link us with the world of art and culture, food practices, craft traditions, etc. And In fact, all change of transformation phenomena in nature, it is whether right now or previously in history. So I'm going to go over some stuff very quickly. Now, the main problem is that where do we get the content? Suppose I'm convinced that this is how chemistry should be taught. Where am I going to get the content? We will create so much content. And here I have the real good news because the content is already here. Because a number of people have already created lots of content. Roald Hoffman is probably a very well-known name in that. So it is not the content that has to be created from scratch. It is already here. But there is no reason to adopt them in the mainstream because our STEM education still is only to create a professional. So while people like Hoffman are intensely admired, they're never followed. Everyone says that's his hobby. He has the great imagination. He can do it. I cannot do it. So this is some of the stuff I'll show you. So this is Hoffman, of course, enormously influential. He's both a scientist and artist, Nobel laureate. And since the last 25 years, he is writing books of this sort, where the chemistry material is presented in the story format. They're all short stories. Sometimes they are kind of detective stories. So it goes into everything. What is a molecule? First, finding out the identity, how you synthesize it. And he says that chemistry is really the art and science and craft and business of molecule making. And indeed, synthesis is a very big part of chemistry. Analytic chemists certainly exist, but often you analyze, break things apart because you want to make new molecules. And almost every lab, every university is probably in the business of synthesizing something. So here are the titles of some of his stories. Molecular mimicry, handshakes in the dark. This is about the chirality of molecules. And this is where he goes into the story of things like thalidomide, because it was not known the molecule actually has two. It does not superimpose with this mirror image. In praise of synthesis. And this is the most interesting part. He says that chemistry always operates on duality. There is help or harm. There is natural, unnatural. And in fact, there is all this kind of talk about toxic chemicals versus natural. But lots of natural substances are terribly toxic. And a synthetic molecule can be perfectly harmless. And there is really no difference between the thyroid that you extract from sheep's gland or which you make in the lab. So what Hoffman is after is balanced, nuanced judgment about chemistry, which is impossible if you think of that foundational structure, because you have left everything out of the table of content. There is no history, no judgment. There is no thinking of the help and harm, no duality. You have basically the march of a caravan. If you follow the caravan, you will not be able to get back. So here is some more. In fact, Hoffman is not the only person. There is, very strangely, Peter Atkins, which I discovered really here in Pittsburgh, reading some books in the lab, in the library. I knew Atkins as this enormously influential writer of the textbooks, physical chemistry and so on. But looks like Atkins have been contributing for a long time into a different genre, which is not STEM nowadays. It is called food history. But what he is doing, the industrialization of the senses, British cheese. There is an enormous amount of chemistry in the article, but he is not talking of molecules. He's talking about the senses, how to the senses gradually the smell, the feel, the touch, the taste of the cheese changed over time. And in fact, this book is an amazing book. There is talk of not only past food, but there might be future attempts to resurrect foods of lost communities, for example, the Mayans. And here is something else. These two might be called scholars' pets, but this is certainly has been used in the classroom. So Kevin Dunn is a chemistry professor. I can't remember, somewhere on the East Coast. He calls his caveman chemistry. And the idea is, as you can see, 28 projects mimicking the discovery of human beings from fire to the plastics. And here is his table of content, as you can see. It uses much historical material. You can see that the paper came from the Chinese. The reactions, here are the Arabs, gunpowder again, and finally here we are in the modern era. But again, interestingly, even though all these material is out there, they're not used. They're not used because there is no group of people for whom we can use them. And I probably won't be able to cover it, but I just want to show you the slides. So this is one of the chemistry professors at UTEP. He gave me the story. I did some work on it. So there is something called Maya blue, which is a legendary ancient classic dyes. And after 1,000 years, it remains as brilliant. And why does it not degrade? So what it did, it probably did not do something legal. So it took some samples and ran them in the lab. And you see these little gaps. And what he found that on binding, they did all kinds of things, heating it, binding it. These slides are there. I borrowed it from them. So I'll pass quickly. So this is the structure. The structure shows why it is a durable material. This is one of the world's first nanomaterials, the Maya blue. What happens, the indigo gets into those pockets. And that is why this remains so resistant to any environmental degradation. So what this kind of work does, it gives you respect of the ancient craft. And we have a case of hubris. We have modern science. We know more than everybody, and nobody else is worth paying attention to. But if you look at chemistry in this new way, you see that there used to be marvelous technology and marvelous ways of knowing in the ancient and medieval world as well. And it is possible to use some of this material and think about this material if we just use an alternative approach. So this is all I will have to say about chemistry. So then I will move on. This is what I did for the past 6 years. So if you have a big grant or something, you have to make sure that your researchers are ethical. So to create ethical researchers, I wrote this abstract. So this is our course abstract. But even though I wrote it, I should be attached to it, but I'm very doubtful about it. Because I think what we are fundamentally doing, we are playing the game of compliance, nothing more than that. We talk a little bit of, well-ordered science, then go through concern, duty, care, virtue, compassion, and so on. And then we think of a globalized community. But I doubt whether anyone, when they come to a dilemma, would actually think in these terms. So we are basically playing the game of compliance to bring in research dollars, that's all. So I've been thinking to teach them in a different style, maybe hybrid style, using the tools of humanities and other things. So right now, the students eventually write a research paper or review paper, but they could do other things. They could write blog, letters, a production maybe. They can create very different kind of I think I missed some slide. No. They can develop role plays and things, other things like that. And the end item need not be a paper, but maybe a production of some sort. So it is possible to use short stories, use tools of creative moral imagination, that means thinking ahead, thinking how the things would be, and teach these year courses in a very different way. And that could be another complement of wisdom. So I have covered two. One is teaching chemistry, but chemistry is, of course, not just chemistry. Every subject under the sun could be reformatted, reshaped. And now the quick thing is, what do we get doing this? What can such comprehensivists do? Well, they can raise questions, they can create a dialogue, And I think there has been such a lot of discussion and writing already about the values in science, but basically it remains discussion among some professionals and the political and the policy setters who have the mandate and the somehow, but there is no third group in between. So we could create a third group. They are the comprehensivist, the modern counterpart of the natural philosophers. They could teach things differently, build a consistent dialogue. For the philosophers, they could provide what is often called impact. And that could be a very different way of doing the same things, but not in the same. And now I want to very quickly say something about the professional scientists view their own practice. Now it looks like STEM is not particularly good to its own careers. It's not particularly good for the professional scientists themselves because they're so overburdened, so overloaded. And here is something I collected from listening to my 3 or 4 years talk with the chemistry faculty, some chemical engineers. Most of them feel that science is a tradition that you are supposed to leave behind. And there are some people very interested in arts. In fact, Russell Kennelly, who told me about the Maya Blue, he was himself very interested in art. But he has now retired, and with that, that is gone. There are some people who do self-assembly of new material. They think of science as an innovation, something very close to business. And engineers, it seems, mostly think of conquest. Let's conquer the world by creating, bringing in new materials, new surface things. And then there are plenty of complaint. Complaint is, I'm obliged to network. This is the moral dilemma. This is the modern dilemma that there can be really no solitary thinkers. There cannot be any small players. You are obliged to network with a big group to keep your project, your lab, your students. And then this is what they usually tell you. I'm physically and mentally exhausted from ever increasing demands of research, teaching, and service. In the teaching, for example, quantity is emphasized over quality. So this is even more cause for complaint. And Roald Hoffman actually gave quite a few talks last year in the middle of the pandemics, and we all attended virtually by Zoom. And after that, there was such a flurry of interdepartment admiring Hoffman. So I said that, why don't you do it? And this is one guy wrote me, imagine what would have happened if Hemingway was forced to churn out one novel every year. So STEM, impressive as it sounds, comes at a tremendous human cost. The cost of the practitioners themselves. And it will sound very heretic to express, especially in such a center for philosophy of science. It might just be that science, who is always thought to be the leader of everything, might need some help. So I'm not saying the emperor has no clothes. I'm saying emperor needs a new set of clothes. So with that, I will go to the last part of my module, which mostly I will leave to someone else, but I want to explain this first. We are changing the scenario. We're going to the North India, very north at the foothills of the Himalayas. So this is where all the glaciers are. Now, you might be familiar with Kashmir Valley, which is, of course, a flashpoint between India and Pakistan. Now, Kashmir Valley is a very beautiful thing. But right next to Kashmir Valley, there is Ladakh, which is a snow desert. Snow desert means it is surrounded by glaciers, very little agricultural activity is possible. And whatever is done is really done from the glaciers. When the glaciers melt in summer, you get a little water, and that is all the support for agriculture. Now, the problem is glaciers are melting. They're melting odd times when they should not melt. So the water supply, which used to be constant, is no longer constant. So this is one of the areas which are the first line of victims of climate change or climate instability. So I want to introduce the work of a man who is an engineer. That means he has degrees in engineering. He's a Ladakhi, he's from Ladakh. The people of Ladakh are very similar ethnically to the Tibetans. They speak a language also which is similar. They have traditionally been Buddhist. So they have these little things called stupas. Stupa is a Sanskrit word, it means a pile, a cone-shaped pile. And it can contain a relic or something, or it might not. The idea is that it introduces some sacredness in the landscape. And you are supposed to go around it, and it's a traditional practice. So what this man did, he created some artificial ice stupas. We call them ice stupas. They're conical structures of ice. And eventually, over summer, they melt very slowly. If you think of a cone, if the water is horizontal, it has a bigger surface. So it can melt under the sun. But the same amount of water, if it is confined to a conical surface, will last longer because you've reduced the surface area. You have put much bigger volume under the same surface, smaller surface area. So this is the idea. So I'm going to play a video. Hopefully this will work. Jennifer, if it does not work, I might need your help. So, okay. I'm not going to play all of it, only 6 minutes. The volume. I don't hear anything. Yes. Here. I didn't realize that. The sound. Here, I'm going to turn off your microphone and then turn on the video. its own level. This is placed in the context surrounded by the Buddhist practice of eliminating the suffering of not just mankind, for everyone. And if you do not have water for your agriculture, the suffering is rather acute. So there are traditional, and suffering, it takes the form of a stupa. It is a venerable object in Ladakh. So you take these sacredness practices and bring them close to what might be called a technological innovation. And the result is nothing mysterious. We are often hesitant to speak of wisdom, virtue, because they're mysterious, they cannot be measured. But all this is perfectly observable, public, and replicable. So I mean this kind of small things. And here we have the idea with this kind of, and a kind of scaffolded science. And again, this, I think this is going to get some pushback because science has been such an iconic institution. It is self-correcting. It is always progressing. It helps throw out all superstition. How is it possible that science itself might somehow? But that's what I think I'm going to argue, that science, especially the kind of enormous demands we are making of it, not only for our technologies and necessities of life or medication, but increasingly how we should live our life. How, for example, you find the right partner, raise children, keep your, even these problems are laid at the door of science. So it's not impossible that under this enormous pressure, it might crack. And that cracking is, I think, what is called postmodern science. So supported by other wisdom practices, here is, you have a pretty safe structure. If you want, you can go and work in the top, but without the scaffold, it would be dangerous. With scaffold, it is perfectly all right. And what we should try to maintain, that all the other partners of science should not be wiped out. Our universities are basically wiping out everything except STEM, putting less and less money out there, hiring less and less faculty. In fact, all the tenure track positions have shrunk into various kind of rotating lecturer positions. That there is some mutual exchange, that there exist places where the young undergraduates can go and have a different kind of conversation, that something like natural philosophy might once again be revived. On the science side, I think we should not, we are making what is called a very assembly line. You can think of a bees in beehive. Bees are constantly, bees were, I should say, were Napoleon's favorite thing, because he said that my empire constantly works for the subjects. Bees are constantly productive. So scientists have to be constantly productive. So why does everyone do it? Why does everyone admire Walt Hoffman, but none follows him? Because there are no other alternatives out there. Since there are no alternatives out there, it encourages the mass drive towards a narrow problem solving from science. So this is kind of what I think the reformed scaffolded science might look like. There is, I'm not saying anything about replacing and actually taking out the system. Let it be there, but surround itself, surround that thing with other things, smaller things. Many traditional knowledge systems can often give wonderful support. And I have a colleague in mathematics, he gave me these examples. So here is a mathematics professor. She kind of 10 or 12 years back, I think it is, this story had become very well known. She, the hyperbolic planes, which you had to only imagine so far, see in your Platonic mind's eye, she created these crochet creations. So you can now crochet those planes and can actually touch them. And when you move and touch them, grasp them, certainly your imagination, your creativity enhances. One of the terms for understanding is grasping. When you grasp something versus you look at it from a distance, your understanding improves. So these are kind of things I mean. Let us surround our scientific discourses by a variety of dialogue partners. In fact, let us bring back natural philosophy. Natural philosophy can be a very useful partner for STEM. It can be a useful partner in our university landscape. So finally, I hope this is my last slide. The idea is not to erase the professional STEM track, but to build another group side by side, and they can engage with multiple domains. I do not exactly have a definition of wisdom, but wisdom often means good decision making. And good decision making calls for getting into multiple domains and being aware of the pockets of ignorance. So that is the business the natural philosophers can do. And I think everyone here knows what the boat is. It is Neurath's boat repairing itself on open sea. And if the boat has to repair itself on the open sea, a two-track thing, expertise is a great thing. Expertise gives your practice power. But power is very irrelevant if you are facing the wrong direction. In fact, it is a source of danger. So this kind of scaffolded practice can be called close to wisdom. I'm not taking them as finished products. I'm taking them more like a seed. So the more people use it, other modules will grow, other ways of looking for wisdom will grow. And that is probably as much as I have been able to think of it. Finally, I have to thank lots of people. One is my home institutions, of course, who gave me the leave and the time and the support to come, but also the Department of Chemistry, and where I've been teaching these year courses for the last 5-6 years. Of course, the center, which gave me this lovely community. My two students, Alex Lopez, you asked me the wonderful question that how can you teach chemistry without using so much physics? He was very unhappy. He got A, so he passed the course, but he somehow did not, he finally went not to med school, but a PhD in neuroscience. But he kept asking me again and again, how can chemistry be taught without using so much physics and still remain chemistry? So, students often bring wonderful question to you, they force you to think, so that is that. Finally, here is a good news and bad news. Tom McLeish is a software, or rather was a soft matter physicist at York University, UK. So I emailed him and he was very, very kind, encouraged me on the project. So much of what I presented, I started thinking. He was himself a great believer in natural philosophy. In fact, he named his own chair in York Chair of Natural Philosophy. But the bad news that I received recently, that he has suddenly passed away. That is what the world is like. So it probably gives us more reason to pursue our researches, look for wisdom, because who knows what is in front of us. So with that, thank you for your time and attention, and I'm happy to answer.
We'll take a 2-minute break, and then we'll have half an hour.
Thank you.